Hi, I'm Vicki Hoth, Education Coordinator for Handi Quilter, and I'd like to talk to you about one of my favorite subjects, TNT, which to me stands for threads, needles, and tension. So we're going to get started with, first of all, the needle. I have two different needles here, and they're large. They're definitely not the needles that you'll be putting in your machine, but they're similar to what you use. And if I turn these around, you can see this one has what we call a flat shank. This one has a round shank. Now this is the type of needle that you will use in your domestic machine, like your Pfaff, your Bernina, Janome, Brother type machine. This is the needle that you will be using in your long arm because it has that full round shank, and that makes that a stronger needle. And then there's another advantage of having that, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So we'll put that aside and let's look at this needle. And let's look at the characteristics of the needle. First, it has this shank, and this is where that will go up into your machine. This has the groove. Now the groove goes to the front of the machine. So if you were facing the front of this machine, this is the front. That's where your thread is going to lie as it goes down into the fabric. And that groove is there to protect the thread as it goes up and down into the fabric, because it goes through many times through the thread or the fabric. And if it wasn't there, then the thread could shred. So we want to make sure that we get the proper size thread to go in that groove so that the groove protects it. Now as I rotate this around, you can see there is a scarf right there. This scarf is where the rotary hook comes by, it passes by to catch the loop that's underneath the fabric, and that's how that stitch is formed. Now let's thread this, and you'll see how this works with fabric. Okay, we've threaded the needle, and as this needle goes down into the fabric, it makes a loop on the back of the needle where the scarf is. And as that comes up, the hook is going to pass through there and catch that, and that's what creates that stitch. So as it comes out of the fabric, the hook will come by with your bobbin thread, and they'll connect together. And you can see how important it is to have the correct size needle with the thread that you're using, because if I had a needle that was too small and my thread was a real heavy top stitching thread, it would just shred that thread to pieces. Do you see that motion? So you want that needle to protect that thread. At Handi Quilter, we carry 5 different sizes of needles, and they start from the smallest, which is a 80-12, 90-14, 100-16, 110-18, and a 120-20. Now, if you look at that needle, you can see the different this is the system, the needle system. And when you're purchasing needles, this is what you want to look for your machine. Now we need to decide what threads, of all these threads, will go with each one of these needles. So let's start here with our largest thread, heavy thread, which is a 12-weight thread. And if I were using this thread, I would pick the 20 needle. The 20 needle has the largest eye, the largest groove for that thread to be protected in and be able to thread actually the eye of it. Also with the 20 needle, this is a 19-weight thread. So this is a 12-weight thread, and this is a 19-weight. And you can see the difference, how much heavier. This is like a jeans thread, which is a top stitching thread. And this is a cotton thread. Then if I add another thread, which is also a 19-weight, and this is a polyester thread, still using the 20 needle. The next size thread that we have is a 30-weight thread, and then there is a 40-weight thread, and this is a polyester, this is a cotton, Then we're going to go with a 40 weight, which is more of an embroidery thread, a trilobal polyester, and then we'll pull up a cotton 40 weight thread. And all these threads, they look similar in size, and they will work with the size 18 needle. The next threads that we have are a 50 weight thread. This is a polyester, and this is a 50 weight thread, which is a cotton. Now, this polyester is a 3-ply. This cotton is a 2-ply. And so if we were to break this, you see the resistance in comparison to this 2-ply, which breaks really easy because of it being a 2-ply rather than the 3-ply. So the polyester on this thread is a lot stronger, but that's not necessarily always the case. Some cottons are stronger than polyesters. Now with these two threads, I would choose the 16 needle. Sometimes I can get away with doing a 14 needle with these, and if I'm having some shredding issues or problems, I might even move up to the 18. So you can see that these 3 needles can kind of be versatile with a lot of different threads. The next 2 threads are quite fine, especially if I were to put our 12 weight over the top of that. You can see the difference in this 12 weight thread. This is a bottom line thread, which is a 60 weight, great for micro quilting and in bobbins. This is a 100 Japanese silk, and so it's very fine as well. And you can see the difference in those threads, where you can go to a size 14 needle or even down to a 12 needle that would accommodate those threads. The next threads are more specialty threads. Monofilament can come in either a nylon or a monopoly, and you can hardly even see that, and that is actually the purpose of that thread, is to stitch on a quilt and give it texture, but not necessarily you don't want to see the thread color. The next one, these two, they're both metallics, and they're a twist, so it has like a polyester core and then a metallic twisted around them. And then I have a couple of these are mylar threads or hologram, and you can see how sparkly they are. They really add some bling to your quilt. They are a flat ribbon thread, so there's no twist to it, that it's not twisted around a couple of different plies. It's just a flat ribbon. Now with the flat ribbon thread, it's a little bit more delicate, and so it breaks really easy, and it stretches and creates issues, but it's really fun to use, and we'll talk about how to use that in a minute. All of these threads, this thread, your monopoly, and your glitter or your hologram threads, you can use a 14 needle or a 16 needle, and you could even go down to a 12 needle on your monopoly. With your twists, your metallic twists, I would suggest at least probably a 16. You could try a 14, but if you're having issues, then just move up to a larger needle. And it's a little bit more texture to it, and sometimes metallics can be a little finicky, but if you'll move up to a 16 needle, you should be fine. And with this thread, it has a tendency to want to be wiry and puddle off, and I like to add a thread net over the top of that, and it kind of helps control that a little bit as it's coming off of the spool. I have some other specialty threads that are really heavy, so let's do a comparison with these threads in comparison to that 12 weight that I can put in the needle. And then let's move up to a 50 or a 60 weight that I can also put in the needle. Do you see the difference? These are going to be really hard to put in the needle, and so these are threads that we use in our bobbin. You take a bobbin and you'll just wind that onto your bobbin, and you can hand wind it or put it on your bobbin winder. It should go through there, and wind that on, and then we'll go talk about later about how to adjust this in your bobbin so that you can do bobbin work. This quilt was quilted and then the bobbin work added later. And this is the type of thread that you'll use so that that really adds some bling to it and a little dimension to the quilt. The next thing on our TNT is tension. So we've covered thread, we've covered needles, and now we need to work with the tension so that we get that balanced stitch in our fabric. One of the first things we want to do is clean out the bobbin case, and if you'll notice in here from a previous quilt that was done, there's lint. So we want to clean that lint out of there, and also on this tension spring, a lot of times lint will get under there, and so you can take a pin and slide under there, or you could take a business card and slide under there, and you can see that lint just comes right out of there. That can make a difference in your tension if you have lint build up underneath this tension spring. Now that we have taken the lint out of the bobbin case, we want to put our bobbin in, and we want it so that as we pull this out, the bobbin is going clockwise around. And then we want to lay this in our hand. Now we want to remember one thing, the bobbin case, bobbin tension is the foundation of the tension. So when I set this, and I have this set correctly, I know that all my adjustment will be is a top adjustment. So I don't have to wonder back and forth, is it the bobbin, is it the top? I know I've set my bobbin correctly and the tension on the bobbin, and then I just need to adjust my top thread. So to do that, you're going to place a full bobbin in the bobbin case, because that full weight of the bobbin gives you the correct tension or the correct drop, and then I'm going to lift this up. And what I want it to do is I want it to stand up in my hands and slide out. And so as I do that, this is definitely way too tight. I can bounce it, I can whatever, it's not going to do anything for me. So that tells me that this is too tight, and if I balance my top tension to match this so that I have a good stitch, then I'd have thread breakage because both of them would be too tight. So I need to loosen the tension on this. And this screw right here, this big screw with the ring around it, is the screw that we're going to adjust. And it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, so because it's too tight, I need to loosen it. So I need to turn this screw to the left. And so I turned it about a quarter of a turn, and then I'm going to test it again. It's still too tight. I can turn it again, and that I turned a quarter of a turn again. Now it's starting to slide a little bit. I know it felt a little slide, but that is still too tight. It's kind of dropping because of the weight, but I want it just maybe a tick on a clock, second on a clock looser. Now it stands up in my hand, and I pull that thread out. This may be a little loose for maybe the Sweet 16 or for the 16, so I may tighten that back up just a little bit. But for my fusion of the Avante, I really like that tension. That is perfect. I have a bobbin here that is so loose that it won't even stand up. So I need to tighten that. Again, go to the screw, and I need to turn it to tighten it. I turned it just a couple, it's still loose. Still just a little bit loose. So I'm doing just small, and that one feels really good. I could tighten that a little tighter. Now I've tightened it too tight because I can bounce it and it's still not coming down. So you can see it is a very small adjustment to go back to what I needed it to go back to. And that's still too tight. There. Stands up in my hand and pulls out. Perfect tension. I have another bobbin. This is a trilobal polyester. It's highlights. I'm going to let it stand up, and it just pulls out correct. So this one has been set correctly. It has a full bobbin and it just stands up nice, and that'll be a perfect stitch once I balance the thread, the top thread. Before we move on to setting the top tension, I want to make you aware of how important the bobbin winder is and having a properly wound bobbin. Now if you'll look at this thread, you can see how it is not wound properly and it's really spongy. I can push that screwdriver down in there and so it would make a horrible stitch. Another bobbin that I have is one that is wound tight enough, but it is wound so tight that it has caused the sidewalls to expand. And so this now is too wide of a bobbin to go in my bobbin case, and it would not stitch. And I don't even know if you can tell a difference in that, but you can see how much wider the yellow bobbin is than the brown because it has been sprung on the sides. The only way you can save this is take the thread off and throw the bobbin away. It is ruined. This one, you can take the thread, you can rewind that thread onto another bobbin and save that thread. Some of the threads on the market are kind of finicky, and we need to know how to use those threads in our machine. So we have the glitter thread, we have a silk thread, we have a monofilament thread, we have a metallic thread, and this is that lightweight cotton. And they work great in our machine if we know how to tension them. Most of these threads can be threaded in the normal path, but this glitter thread, which is the mylar, the hologram thread, needs to be threaded differently. The thing about this is it's a flat ribbon thread. It's kind of like a roll of toilet paper. And so if I set this thread this way and pull this off, it starts creating a twist. And so if I turn this way and roll it off, then it will roll off clean without making a twist. So we want to do that with this thread. So what we have is a horizontal spool pin, and we'll take this thread, and it doesn't matter whether the thread rolls off under or if we turn it and the thread rolls off over the top. Then we want to thread it through only one of the 3-hole thread guides. So what we'll do is thread it through the back to the front, and then from there thread it as usual. This thread and the monofilament, you will need to loosen up your tension dial here. And you can see that I've put a little white dot on the tension dial. It doesn't come that way, but if that helps you, there is a little dot there, and I've just painted it white. And so with that thread, you'll want that to be really light tension. So to lighten that, you're going to turn this maybe 3 or 4 times so that when this flosses in there into the tension, it's almost no tension. Now that's not enough tension, so then I can go back, and then as I pull that, even though this other thread is in there, as I pull that, I can feel just a little bit of tension, and I know it's not going to break. Because if that was too tight and I tried to pull it, it would break that thread. Okay, what about those normal threads that we use every day? A cotton or a polyester that's about a 40 or a 50 weight. The thread that I have in here today is a 30 Tex Golden Threads Quilter's Choice thread. And it's a nice strong thread. It has a little bit of a lint on it, but not bad. It's a nice quilting thread. So I've set that in here, and I want to test it, and as I test, I can't even pull it. It is so tight. And you can see the needle flex, knowing that if this thread was to stitch, it would probably break. So what I want to do is I want to come up to my tension knob, and I want to loosen that. And so to loosen that, I need to turn it towards me, which is to the left. And you notice that I'm turning it not just a click, I'm turning it a full revolution. Now I'm going to test my thread here, and that feels better. I know that if I were to stitch, then that wouldn't break. But does it look right? So let's look at some threads I've stitched out some fabric or some squiggly lines here, and we're going to look at these and see what is wrong or what is right with each one of them. So if we start, let's look at this one right here, the first one. And what we want is the perfect stitch. So we want the stitch to look like this one, stitch the second row. I just point with that. We want it to look like you can see each defined stitch. Well, with this one, what we're seeing is a straight line of thread. I'm not seeing the stitches. So if my bobbin is set correctly, then my top thread is too tight because it's pulling the bobbin thread up and it's just laying there on top of the fabric. Now I want you to look at this third row. This right here, can you see that? You're starting to see that top, the bobbin thread, almost eyelashes come up through there. This again is just laying there. This is really tight. Eventually the thread would probably break because it is too tight. Now if I were to look at the back of it, it looks nice on the back. The stitches look nice. But on the top, that is not a good stitch. You want those stitches to lock into the fabric, which creates a friction, and that is what locks it and makes it a good tight stitch. Now our next one, which is row number 4, they're looking okay on the top. I can see the defined stitches, but look what I'm seeing. I'm seeing loops. That tells me that my top thread is way too loose. So if I were to look at the back of this row, do you see how that top thread is just not even pulling up? Now I have eyelashes on the back and loops. This might indicate that I don't even have it flossed into the tension dial, and we'll go back and show you how to do that. But this is definitely, because the bobbin thread is set correctly, the top thread is definitely too loose. Now let's go to this stitch. Look how nice that looks. Even you're seeing each one of those stitches individually. Then as I bring it to this side, the back, you're seeing each one of those stitches individually. This is perfect tension. This is what you want to see. Now if I have a light thread, like our glitter or our monofilament or the silk, you'll definitely want to loosen the bobbin tension so that you can loosen the top and they'll balance back together and make this perfect stitch again. I can, with a heavier thread, I can have a little more tension and it will not break. But you still have to be careful because you think you can use a lot of tension on that and it's going to look good. But then what happens, it might start to pucker in because you've got too much tension on both. So it'll just draw into your fabric. So you don't want that. You want that fabric to lay flat and you want those perfect stitches. What I'd like to do is show you how to thread the machine and get the thread flossed into those tension dials. So I've threaded it with coming from the back to the front and wrap around. It's like a barber's pole. So it goes through all 3 of those. Then it's going to go through that thread guide. And then as I hold this, I'm going to wrap that around the tension dial and I want it to pull in, and it just makes a click almost when you pull that in. See, if I pull that out and you heard that click, I pull that in. You can feel that go in there. You want to catch that spring and then go underneath that stirrup, and then it's very important to take that thread and go up and thread it through the take-up lever, because if it doesn't go through the take-up lever, it won't make that complete stitch. It just makes a real mess on the bobbin. So again, as I pull this, I want to make sure that that is flossed in that tension. And as I pull that, I can tell that it's not too tight. I think it's going to be good tension. And then you want to go through the little hole in the needle bar, that little silver ring, and then thread it as usual. Now, if I'm having some thread issues, like I'm having a shredding issue or a skipping issue, possibly your needle is not in correctly at the 6 o'clock. So that groove needs to be at 6 o'clock facing you. If I were to take that groove and turn it so that it's at over here at say 5:30, that makes that loop that forms further away from the hook. And so that is possibly one of the reasons it's skipping, is because it's not catching it. If I were to take that needle and turn it, so say at 6:30, it puts that loop on the thread closer as the hook comes around, and it could cause some shredding. So we like it to be at the 6 o'clock. If it is shredding, you could back it off a little to the 5:30. If it is skipping, you could move it to the 6:30, and it makes the loop closer. So that's a little bit of the way you can kind of do a little tuning, timing on the spot there. I showed you earlier this thread and how it was applied on here, but I want to show you how to take that thread that I've wound onto a bobbin and get the correct tension, because what you want is that thread to just lie there and have the top thread couch over it. So what you'll have to do is, once you've quilted your quilt, you'll turn it over, flip it over, and then when you're stitching, the bobbin will apply this thread. And then you can just choose a matching top thread. So this is a razzle dazzle thread, and I've wound it on the bobbin. And then what I want to do is it's just way too tight, and so I want to loosen that screw just enough, but be careful because that screw can fall out. Loosen it enough so that as I hold it in my hand, and that's still too tight. Actually, I'm tightening it, that's why it's too tight. There. As I hold it in my hand, it pulls out just like that, and now that'll make that beautiful stitch across that fabric. That's how easy that is. When you're finished, you can go ahead, put your other bobbin back in, and then tighten that back to the way you would want it for your next thread. I have a couple examples I want to show you on when you would use one thread over another. Here's my bottom line, that's very fine 60 weight thread. So I want to put a texture in, but I don't want the thread to be blasting at me. So I've taken this, and we'll turn that to this right side, and it's just a texture of thread, a 60 weight thread giving me texture, but not screaming that there's a lot of thread there. Now, this one, I want it to scream that there's a lot of thread there. So this is thread play, this is painting. And so then I would choose those heavyweight threads, because that is what's making my quilt. I hope today that you have learned a lot about that TNT, threads, needles, and tension, and that you'll be able to have success on your quilting machine.